Basically, we're just talking about the role of the media in elections, and our duty to cover the issues that matter most to readers and voters. Talked a little bit about getting away from the horse race coverage of elections and really focus in on what people are talking about, and also our job in holding elected officials and candidates for elected office accountable to speak directly to those issues and actually inject some substance into their campaigns.
What separates this election from previous big elections in Mississippi?
We have just about every statewide office up for grabs this year, and so that makes it really exciting. Also, for the first time in many, many years, we have a really strong contested general election for governor, most likely. So that's a different dynamic. Usually in Mississippi, everything is settled by the primaries. But this year, we'll go into November with a really strong gubernatorial race as well.
Well, I think there's going to be a pretty interesting 2019 election cycle coming up, and we talked today a little bit about the media's role in it and kind of the different varying media aspects of how people are communicating through social media and how candidates are connecting to voters in Mississippi, and a little bit about what the national interest is in the race.
How has the media coverage changed from this year to maybe 4 or 8 years ago?
Well, I think actually candidates have a lot better mechanism to reach out to voters directly. And so the media is a little bit more reflective of that. Instead of driving the coverage more, media is a little bit more in a reactionary mode as to what candidates and even voters are pushing messages on.
This upcoming election is going to be completely different than a lot of the elections I've covered in the last 22 years, because here we're looking at so many different positions in statewide government changing over. So today we talked a lot about not only the different candidates and some of the roles that are going to happen there, but we also talked about the role of the media and talk about how that is changing and how we affect the coverage as well.
What do you anticipate that you're going to see in this election that will be different than previous big elections in Mississippi?
Well, because you have so many contested races and so much turnover, there's going to be, even the primaries up until August 6th are going to be very, very active this time. And so, like for instance, the Neshoba County Fair this year is going to be really dynamic because you got so much competition. So it's going to be really exciting.
What is your advice to voters as they prepare for the election?
Make sure you pay attention. Learn as much as you can about each candidate so you can make an informed choice. And make sure you get out and vote, because that is where your power lies.
Let's talk about millennials. Millennials are the most diverse generation in American history. What impact do you think they'll have on the 2019 election here in Mississippi? Let's talk with you, Sam.
I don't know. That's a group that for several years now has been the favorite group to talk about, because they were hitting the age where their influence in society in general, business, politics, culture, was really starting to be felt. They are also, a much larger group than those of us from Gen X, so it's a fascinating it's a fascinating exercise to look at any demographic and see how you can influence them and how they can influence whatever your business is or whatever your goals are. But I think that, like you said, they are the most diverse generation that we've seen, and that's the problem. You can't look at millennials. Millennials is, as a group, simply people who share, a certain birthday range, and that's it. That's what, after several years of market research and study, we've seen. They are also the least likely to act, vote, shop, anything as a group. They're not baby boomers. They're not Gen X's. They have such a variety of not just ethnicities, but also of beliefs. And that's largely informed, I believe, by being raised natively in a digital era, being so native to social media, being exposed to so many different opinions and sources of information that, you can say it's fractured them, I guess, in one way, but that's really not an accurate description, I don't think, because, You know, when you say something's fractured, you think that it's been broken into different pieces. But I think it's a population base, and I think it's probably the most representative of maybe the world population, probably not even just a national population, because I think the beliefs are probably much more dynamic and diverse than just larger national beliefs. But when it comes to a state race, especially, I think they fall along just any other lines. I think probably geographic location. I think economic, socioeconomic situations. Where they go to church, where they work. I think those are far more important factors in a state race with a population this size than what their age group is.
Yeah. Marshall?
2 words, Shad White, sitting right there. No, we got a first millennial statewide officer right there, too. And you're running unopposed after 3 months on being in office. That says a lot. I don't know. You think about it. I talked to some of my son's friends who are millennials, obviously, and they have very interesting views and worries. They're worried about the environment. They're worried about things that, what kind of world they're going to inherit from us. So it'd be fascinating, but the question is, will they get out and vote? And naturally, there's a tendency for older voters to get out more and vote. And will the millennials make their voice heard? That would be probably my biggest question about the statewide race. But no, for me, it is good though to see millennials getting involved politically, and that's why I threw Shad's name out there. It's good to see people coming back and giving back to the state, and that gives me a little bit of hope for the future.
Alan?
I think the political roadside is littered with the carcasses of people who bank on the 18 to 35 vote. It is in Mississippi, if you read the polling, if you look at the math, it is not a super appreciable portion of the electorate. Now that can change, and again to social media, that can change really quick. But right now, today, you're not, even in the early phases of campaign organizations where people are kind of lining up behind candidates, I'm personally not seeing a ton of movement, mobilization, energy, fire from younger age classes. And I think that a lot of that is because they feel as a generation that they can change the conversation in ways that aren't at the ballot box. They can mobilize movements. They can use social media as a platform. They can change opinion, and you've seen, a huge change in not only nationally but even locally on cultural issues such as gay marriage and equal rights and different things like that. A lot of that has been a push, but it has not necessarily been a political push. There's not necessarily been the driving forces of that cultural change haven't really occurred at the ballot box as much as it just has culturally. And I think that's where they seek to have more influence.
We kind of touched on this earlier, but money plays a crucial role in campaigns, and often say that the person with the most money tends to win. But what else plays a role when it comes to the elections that's crucial in winning an election if it's not about the money? Let's start with you, Sam.
I think messaging is still king, and that's money just helps you get the message out more. Again, social media has been a great equalizer in that aspect. Mass media made it easier to get your message out to more people, but it didn't make it cheaper to do. Back when you had to travel town to town to town and speak and earn free media coverage, that was the least expensive means of campaigning that there was. When TV became the major player for messaging, it became very expensive and cost prohibitive for a lot of people to be able to do it. But then with social media, and as it's become even stronger, able to do even targeted paid social media is nowhere near the expense that TV was, newspapers was, direct mail was. So that's helped equalize it a lot, and it's no longer the person with the most money wins. However, the person with the most money usually wins. But there's also a saturation point. You know, there's a point after which, you know, how many millions of dollars more than you have than the other person really doesn't matter as much because you've saturated a media market. And in Mississippi, that's pretty easy to do because you know, our media markets are not expensive compared to most other media markets in the country, which is one of the reasons that you see a lot of, well, the major reason you see a lot of out-of-state fundraising is because you need the wealth from out-of-state to come in here. But the reason that candidates have been so successful in the past is when you go to them and say, this is how much money I need for a media buy, they're like, that's it? That's all you need? You sure? Okay, sure, I'll write that check. But there's a saturation point with TV media and with direct mail and, you know, even with, you know, rubber chicken dinners. Whereas that saturation point with social media, we haven't seen it yet. It becomes just part of the overall discussion. And I think that's because of the engagement of the voters. You know, there's no engagement from getting a direct mail piece. The only engagement with, you know, TV ads is either to go do something else or fast forward through it. The engagement with the, you know, with newspaper ads is to turn the page, but with social media, they get to interact, and so they feel a part of the discussion. And so that's the greatest equalizer right now. But and that's why you see some candidates, that you see a freshman representative in Congress who's getting so much attention that has never happened before like this, and you could argue maybe is outsized for, you know, for what it is. But yeah, I think in Mississippi the safe bet's still the most money wins, but there is a saturation point. After a few million, it doesn't really matter a whole lot.
Alan?
I had an economics professor at Millsaps who used to say, you can't push on a string. You can't make something happen that inherently doesn't want to happen. However, I agree with Sam completely that money correlates really, 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 really high with political success, probably well north of 92, 95%. It is unusual when somebody is, you know, dramatically outspent and doesn't win. And I think the reason for that is that money in the political sense is at some level affirmation, right? There's a difference between writing your own campaign $1 million check and getting, you know, $1 million, $100 at a time, right? Because those, you know, Haley Barbour used to say, some guy who gives you $1,000 might support you, but somebody who gives you $25 is going to vote for you. And so, you know, we spend a lot of time in political races because money does matter. Where it comes from, how much it is, we spend an inordinate amount of time looking through campaign finance, you know, disclosures, and we spent a lot of time in the 2018 special election looking at where money comes from, and it matters. It does matter, and it affects policy. I've been doing this for 15 years, and you'd have a really, really, really tough time, you know, trying to convince me that where a candidate's money comes from doesn't affect policy once they're elected. And so it is an enormous issue. It's something that is worthy of our time, certainly in the media, to cover it, to dissect it, to understand it, and in a lot of cases to expose it.
One of the more interesting campaigns since I've lived in Mississippi was the year that Greg Harper got into Congress, because Greg was running against opponents with a lot more money than he had. But what Greg's gift was the fact that he had been volunteering with the party, he had been working, he was down in Florida during the Bush recount. He was, I mean, people knew Greg, they liked Greg, and the difference was that people were paying to put their own stamps on the envelope for Greg. I mean, the thing about money, and money's great, and obviously we have a candidate with an awful lot of money, and we'll see if that can overcome some other sins. But one thing I can tell you about Mississippi, it's a little bit different than any other place I've covered or that I've lived, is that if people don't know you, they're not going to pay attention to you. And sometimes if they know you, they really aren't going to pay attention to you. And I mean, if you've been plowing salt in the field for years, I don't know how much money is going to save you. So you have to be really careful about that. But yes, it is nice to have money. I think both of them are spot on. I like what you said about Alan, about seeing where the money comes from. But yeah, Greg's race really was one that really kind of taught me that, you know, if you're going to run, you better make sure you've done the work out in the fields before you ever do it.
All right, interesting topic there. Governor's race is the big race out there, but what other race, statewide race, do you see as interesting and exciting this election year? Let's start with you there, Alan.
I think the Attorney General's race has a lot of intrigue in that you have 4 really, really different candidates. You have some pro-Trump people, you have some anti-Trump people, you have some populists, you have some real policy people. You have, I mean, there's really kind of a spectrum out there of different candidates that I think that one will really be a scrap. It'll really be a dogfight. I think Andy Taggart getting in that race really, really changed the complexion of it and the issues that are going to be talked about there. And then I'll cheat a little bit. The other interesting race that I'm going to watch with some excitement is the Central District Public Service Commissioner's race. And it's odd, but you know, Brandon Presley's running unopposed in the north. I think Dane Maxwell's a pretty prohibitive favorite in the southern district. But I think you've got 4 candidates, 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats, that could all wind up on top of that race. I think it's a really interesting, just a cross section. On the Republican side, you've got Brent Bailey and Nick Lott. If Nick wins, he would be the I guess the highest ranking black Republican or black state elected official in the state of Mississippi. I think on the other side you've got Ryan Brown, who is probably more of the political establishment. I think close to Cecil Brown, who I think is kind of pushing that direction. And then you have DeKeither Stamps, who's a Jackson City councilman. I think you could flip a coin and see which race which way either of those races go. I think it's going to be a fascinating, probably one of the more interesting of the cycle if they can attract some money.
Marshall?
I was on Facebook yesterday, and I noticed somebody was calling Andy Taggart a liberal, and I could hear Kirk Fordyce's ghost just howling on that one. I was like, we truly live in the upside down. Now, the race, honestly, from a cartooning standpoint, I'll have to go there, is Andy Gibson, Ricky Cole. I mean, because Andy loves being agriculture commissioner. He's got the hat. He'll throw it on at any time. But you never know what Ricky Cole's going to say. So, I mean, even though it's a little bit farther down the ticket, that's going to be a lot of fun. And 2, honestly, the governor's race, that's always a good one to watch, too. And, of course, that's what everybody will be watching. But, yeah, you're right. The AG's race is going to be a complete dogfight.
Sam?
Yeah, the AG's race, the Republican primary for Attorney General, to me, is the most fascinating primary there is, even above the governor's race. Just because you have 3 really established, strong candidates. And it's also one of those races where it's hard to run on certain issues because it's the Attorney General's race. It's not Lieutenant Governor where there's a lot of legislative issues or Governor where anything goes. They'll still do it the same, but I think it's going to be a very interesting race. But this year especially, if you enjoy politics and if you're wonkish and a big data nerd, it's going to be fascinating after the races just to dig those numbers and see if the electorate has changed at all. Because we see that with presidential races. They look different enough from state races that it matters. But you've never seen state races really be able to move certain blocks to the ballot. But in this race, in this year, I think you could see a lot of that. And so just having this many contested primaries, this many contested general, even the lieutenant governor's race in the general, which I don't, Hoseman is, easily the prohibitive favorite. But he's running against someone who at least has an issue who's going to, I don't think many people will outwork Hughes. He's at least going to be out there. But, there should be some substance to that race, which, would be which is good. Anytime you have that's good. But you were talking about the PSC race. Some of those, depending on who the nominees are, that can really move different blocks and different geographic areas out to vote. And that could influence, the governor's race. That could influence, other tight general election races. Not that I don't think there are any, maybe overlooking one or two, but, the PSC could be a very strong general election as well. And then, of course, the governor's race.
Right now, it seems the only excitement right now is in the governor's race as far as the attention that's going on. Do you see things really picking up by the summertime, or what do you see things going? We'll start with you, Rob.
Oh, of course it's going to pick up. And then, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, I think the Neshoba County Fair this year is actually going to have a lot of heat to it, other than the heat and the dust that traditionally is out there. But, I mean, obviously, like they've said before, as soon as we get a little bit closer to August 6th, the money will really start kicking in. We'll see more ads. People, because right now people are worried about getting out of school. They're busy doing that sort of thing. But I think over the summertime, traditionally when the news cycle is pretty slow anyway, those ads are going to start hitting, and I think it's going to start getting on people's radar. So, yeah, no, it's going to do nothing but this until the primary.
Alan?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's going to be a long, hot summer. And my hope for the cycle is that we see Democratic debates, that we see Republican debates, and even some down ticket stuff. There's so much movement and people that are going to be in new positions that haven't been there before. This is I've often said that I think Haley Barbour kind of artificially put a cap on a lot of the political pressure for over a decade, and now you're starting to see that kind of seep out, and it's like there's a lot of pressure building up, and on both sides of the aisle, but the kind of the natural political order of things has been relatively contained, and I think there's a real opportunity that the top just blows off, and you have kind of dog fights on all fronts.
Sam?
Yeah, I mean there's a pretty normal calendar of when things pick up and when they settle back down and when they pick back up again. I think, again, what makes this year so different is just the number of contested primaries and having, at least one statewide general election that's going to be heavily contested. Going back to the media's role in all of this, though, and you mentioned debates. I love debates. But it's become fashionable not to attend. You can't get away with that on a national scale, but you can get away with that on a statewide scale. Usually front runners have nothing to lose in debates. So, nothing to gain in debates and everything to lose in debates. So you can't really have a debate unless you've got all the candidates there. And that's not a shot at anybody. That's just, and I'm not, there are some legitimate reasons when people are not in debates. Where the media plays a role is taking what you would normally get from a debate and presenting that. If we cover the horse race, if we cover the polls, if we cover, just who's doing what, and we just parrot what they say at, whatever stand-up that they're doing, we have failed. But if we reflect the issues and challenges that are on the minds of our audience, and we hold elected officials and candidates for elected office accountable for answering and speaking to those issues, and then providing context for whether or not it works or doesn't work, or, if we do those things, then, we've done our job. And that is becoming increasingly more important, especially in local and state races, where you don't get as much of the interaction between candidates.
All right, I get to put you on the spot. Give me your best predictions of what you expect to happen in the primaries coming out. All right, go ahead, Marshall.
Shad's going to win. I got that one.
Good job, Shad. Yeah, you're right. That's a safe one.
Interestingly, I've been kind of predicting for a while that political gravity would kind of take hold of at least the legislature at some level. It is just really, really, really hard to maintain a supermajority. And before qualifying day, I felt reasonably sure that Republicans, I couldn't pick which ones, but political gravity kind of takes hold. That will be the interesting one to watch. I don't know if I can predict that, although I think it's going to be really, really close. I think in the House, I think that's the one you got to watch. And then the other prediction, I guess, for lack of a better term, is that in the middle of all of this stuff, we may be fighting, there may be a Senate primary, because remember, 2020 is a presidential election year, so do the math. The math is that if somebody were to challenge Cindy Hyde-Smith in a primary, that primary is in March, which means they probably got to be up and rolling. I mean, full speed, full sprint, running, trying to take down an incumbent in a primary, probably by Labor Day. So there is a real chance that, we might see some crossover, and certainly, again, presidential politics. And I guess the last thing I'll say is I think Trump will be visible here. I think, obviously, Trump will be visible even if he's not here, because I think a lot of people will be calling up his image and his likeness and his support. But he is going to, I think, cast a long shadow. He likes it here. I think people, at least part of the electorate like him here. I think he'll want to be here down the stretch, and I think he'll be a factor in the race.
I noticed David McRae already has him on his website, first thing.
And,
so,
yeah,
he's there.
Sam?
Yeah, there are 3 states, speaking back to, Trump's influence, there are only three states with elections this year. So, I would, with a expected contested general and the governor's race, I would be shocked if the president's not down here, a number of times. That would be, that would say something if he wasn't, I think, more than, anything else. But, yeah, I'm not going to make any predictions except for, I think Hughes and Hoseman will be in the general for the lieutenant governor, and I agree with Marshall that Shad's going to win. But past that, I know what I think, but I wouldn't dare share it right now.
All right, very good. It's going to be an exciting time, everybody, and I hope you tune in to the election coverage from all of us here for the 2019 election. We want to thank Marshall, Sam, and Alan for their participation. We got about 8 more minutes. There's another session here in this hall as well. But thank you all for coming out, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.